Summer of 1943, Crossville Camp, Tennessee. A brown hissing liquid in a glass bottle caught the gaze of a German soldier standing before the camp canteen. He was a veteran of the Afrika Korps, hardened by 2 years of desert fighting, surviving on hard biscuits and ersatz coffee. This sweet, fizzy drink that Americans called Coca-Cola seemed like a materialized impossibility. Its price, only 5 cents at the camp's cafeteria. As the guards explained, that was the same price American children paid from their pocket money. Across the United States, where by that summer 371,683 German prisoners of war were held, soldiers of the Reich were about to face a reality that shattered every claim of Nazi propaganda about weak, decadent America. They discovered a country where ice cream was an everyday dessert, where soft drinks were sold everywhere, and where chocolate bars were so common that guards could casually hand them out. These simple pleasures, treats that most German children had never even dreamed of, began to erode Nazi ideology far more effectively than any counterpropaganda. America's abundance was measured in grams of sugar, millions of bottles, and gallons of ice cream, revealing an industrial power that turned Germany's deprivation not into noble sacrifice but meaningless suffering. The astonishment at American sweetness would soon grow into total psychological transformation. End of the desert. The lesson of the K-rations. The surrender of the Afrika Korps in Tunisia in May 1943 brought about the capture of nearly 250,000 German and Italian soldiers. These battle-hardened men, who, under Rommel, had driven the British back toward Egypt, expected brutal treatment. Nazi propaganda had convinced them of American cruelty and starvation. Instead, only hours after surrendering, they received American K-rations. These field meals, often the subject of complaint among U.S. troops, seemed like treasure to the prisoners. Crackers, processed cheese, candy, fruit bars, instant coffee, sugar tablets, and cigarettes. German soldiers who had lived for months on minimal rations viewed these emergency kits as a royal feast. Military records from North Africa confirmed that American forces fed their prisoners pancakes with syrup, fresh eggs, and milk, foods that had disappeared from German army menus years earlier. Systematic and generous feeding of enemies began immediately, and its psychological effect was immense. One German officer later testified to the Red Cross. "We expected to be starved. Instead, the Americans fed us better than our own army ever did. The confusion about their resources was our first lesson." The journey across the Atlantic, the impossible dessert. In the summer of 1943, the Liberty ships carrying prisoners of war across the Atlantic offered an intensive course in American abundance. These vessels, mass-produced at a record pace, one completed every 42 hours at the height of wartime production, transported up to 30,000 prisoners to the United States each month. Naval records show that POW rations aboard these ships met or even exceeded the standards for the regular crew. Around 3,500 calories a day, including fresh bread, meat, vegetables, and coffee with sugar and milk. Standard refrigeration systems on American ships kept food fresh during the 2-week voyage. But the most astonishing detail was the confirmed fact that prisoners were sometimes served ice cream during their crossings. The war diary of USS General M.B. Stewart from July 1943 contains an entry describing the serving of ice cream to prisoners on Independence Day, July 4th, using the ship's own ice cream machine that could produce 10 gallons at a time. For men who had not seen ice cream since before the war, this frozen dessert in the middle of the ocean defied comprehension. When the ships docked at ports such as Norfolk or Newport News, the prisoners saw an America that Nazi propaganda had described as a myth. On the docks and in the port shops, they saw shelves stacked with chocolate bars from Hershey's, Mars, and Nestle. U.S. Army procurement records from 1943 show that these stores sold dozens of types of candy at the standard price of 5 cents per bar, the same for everyone. The train journey inland became the next stage of education. Unlike the cattle cars used for prisoner transport in Europe, German POWs traveled in passenger coaches, and full meals were served in dining cars. Documented menus from July 1943 listed fried chicken, vegetables, pie, and coffee. The prisoners were astonished to learn that this was not special treatment, it was just standard American rail service. Camps and the 5 cents, the symbol of industrial democracy. Upon arrival in the camps scattered across America, from Texas and Oklahoma to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, the prisoners entered a world that felt almost unreal. Each camp was surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers, yet inside, life resembled a small American town. There were libraries, sports fields, cinemas, workshops, and, the most shocking to the newly arrived, canteens. In those canteens, the German POWs could buy chocolate, cigarettes, and soft drinks using camp coupons instead of real money. A bottle of Coca-Cola still cost 5 cents, the same as in every town across the United States. The price did not change because it symbolized something deeper than commerce, the democratic equality of consumption. Whether a factory worker, a soldier, or even a captured enemy, everyone could buy a bottle of Coca-Cola for the same amount. To men who had grown up in a rigid, hierarchical system where every gram of sugar was rationed and every privilege was earned through rank, this felt like a social revolution. American abundance seemed limitless. Ice cream served weekly, fresh bread daily, chocolate bars as common as potatoes, cigarettes sometimes 2 packs per day. A report by the U.S. War Department's Special Projects Division in 1944 noted that material abundance is in itself an instrument of psychological re-education. The same report concluded that the sight of wealth used with equality weakens militaristic thinking more than any lecture. In letters home, strictly censored of course, many prisoners avoided describing the full comfort they experienced, but the change in tone was noticeable. The bitterness and arrogance of the first months faded into curiosity and even admiration. One POW later recalled, "We came to despise what we had believed. When you are treated like a human being by the enemy, you begin to doubt who the enemy really is." By 1944, ice cream had become more than just a dessert for American soldiers. It was a strategic symbol of morale and technological superiority. The U.S. Navy even built floating ice cream factories aboard ships stationed in the Pacific. The most famous of them, a converted barge with refrigerated machinery, could produce 10 gallons, about 38 liters, of ice cream every 7 minutes. To the Germans working in POW labor detachments, often assigned to American farms or lumber mills, this level of comfort and production seemed unimaginable. In Germany, ice cream had become a wartime luxury long forgotten since 1941. The Allied bombing campaigns had destroyed dairy plants, and sugar was tightly rationed. But the most powerful re-education tool was still the experience of fairness. Guards did not insult or beat them. The rules were strict but humane. Meals arrived on time. Sick prisoners received medicine. When someone tried to escape, the punishment was procedural, not brutal. To soldiers raised in the authoritarian world of Nazi discipline, this was a revelation. One prisoner later said, "In Germany, fear ruled us. Here, order came without fear." It was the first time many of them saw authority without cruelty. American psychologists observed that within 6 months, a visible change occurred. Hostility faded. Curiosity grew. Camps began organizing voluntary lectures about democracy, science, and even American literature. In several Tennessee and Wisconsin camps, POWs painted murals depicting peaceful farm life, scenes that looked nothing like the militarized art of the Reich. An internal report of 1945 summarized the transformation. The prisoner, having experienced freedom within captivity, becomes incapable of returning to totalitarian thought. When the war ended and repatriation began, many POWs carried home not just memories of abundance, but new moral frameworks. The first post-war German mayors, teachers, and local administrators in the American occupation zone were often former POWs who had spent years in U.S. camps. They quietly brought with them a new vision: democracy not as theory, but as lived experience. When the war finally ended in 1945, millions of men returned home, some victorious, some defeated, but none unchanged. For many German prisoners, America's true weapon had not been its tanks, planes, or atomic bombs. It had been the ordinary life, the everyday decency and comfort that the United States managed to preserve even during the hardest war in human history. They had seen a world where food was not a privilege, where authority was not terror, and where even an enemy was treated with a degree of respect. And the symbol of that revelation was not the flag or the rifle. It was the 5-cent bottle of Coca-Cola, the ice cream on a hot day, the chocolate bar given without demand. The abundance that America shared so casually had transformed into a moral message that freedom could be sweet, that democracy could be generous, and that strength could exist without cruelty. In 1946, when repatriation ships began carrying the prisoners back to Germany, Red Cross observers recorded a remarkable phenomenon. On the decks, men who had once fought for Hitler now hummed American songs: "Don't fence me in, you are my sunshine." They joked in broken English and traded stories about American kindness. Upon their return, many of them spoke to their families not of humiliation, but of astonishment. They described the United States as a land where people smile even in war, a country where everyone has enough, a place where humanity feels normal. In the following decades, as West Germany rebuilt itself under democratic rule, those same men quietly shaped its new character. Historians now call this phenomenon the Coca-Cola effect, the moral disarmament achieved through simple prosperity and kindness. The world had witnessed many revolutions born of violence, but this one, born of sweetness, fairness, and respect, became the most enduring. Because in the end, America's victory was not just military. It was the triumph of a worldview, proven in chocolate, ice cream, and a bottle that always cost 5 cents. After the sweet victory, how memory shaped the future. In the quiet years that followed the war, the world slowly began to breathe again. Cities rebuilt from ashes, families reunited, and nations searched for meaning after so much loss. But among those who had once been prisoners in America, there remained a special kind of memory, not of pain or humiliation, but of discovery. They had learned something invisible, something that no propaganda or ideology could teach: that the strength of a nation lies not only in its weapons, but in its humanity. For them, the image of America was not a symbol of dominance. It was the memory of a guard offering a cigarette with a smile, of a kitchen worker handing out ice cream on a hot day, of the familiar sound of a Coca-Cola bottle opening at dusk. Those moments, so ordinary to Americans, were extraordinary to men who had come from a world of scarcity and fear. In small German towns during the 1950s, those same men quietly shared what they had seen. They became teachers, engineers, craftsmen, and farmers. They spoke of fairness, of work done without hatred, and of the dignity of every person. Their stories reached students, families, and communities that had grown up amid ruins. One man, who had spent 3 years in a camp in Texas, later said, "We did not return as prisoners. We returned as witnesses, witnesses to another way of living." That other way slowly shaped a new Germany, one that valued dialogue over obedience, cooperation over conquest, and respect over fear. Across the ocean, in America, few people even realized how deeply those gestures had mattered. For the guards and camp workers, kindness had been a simple duty, a reflection of who they were. They never imagined that a cup of coffee or a shared meal could help rebuild another country's moral foundation. And yet, history would show that it did. The echo of soft power. In later decades, political scientists gave a name to this phenomenon: soft power, the ability to influence others not by force, but by example and attraction. But long before the term existed, America had already demonstrated it through sugar, songs, and smiles. The POW camps had become silent classrooms of democracy. No speeches, no slogans, just fairness, order, and everyday decency. That was the education that truly mattered. When journalists visited post-war Germany in the 1950s, they were surprised by how many people spoke warmly of the United States. Some remembered the Hershey bars, others the music of Glenn Miller playing on the camp radio, others the taste of ice cream after years of hunger. All these memories blended into one simple truth: freedom could feel good. This lesson, born in one of humanity's darkest era, became the foundation of a brighter age. From conflict to connection. As the Cold War began, the world once again divided itself into ideologies. But those who had lived through the American camps knew that true freedom was not just a political system, it was a culture of respect. They had seen guards and officers who treated them not as enemies, but as human beings. That memory could not be erased. Even in divided post-war Europe, that invisible bridge of respect remained. When American aid arrived through the Marshall Plan, many of the former POWs helped distribute food and supplies. They did so with quiet recognition, as if they were returning a kindness once given to them. And so, in the most unexpected way, the sweetness of Coca-Cola and the generosity of ice cream helped lay the foundation for one of history's greatest reconciliations, between two nations that had once fought to destroy each other. Children grew up hearing stories not of hatred, but of humanity. The Coca-Cola bottle, the chocolate bar, the scoop of vanilla ice cream. These became more than treats. They became symbols of peace. Museums in Germany today display them as reminders of a strange truth: that compassion, even toward an enemy, can change the world more deeply than any weapon. When historians look back on the 20th century, they see many forms of power: political, military, economic. But hidden beneath them is another force, softer yet stronger: the ability to make people believe in goodness again. That is what America achieved without even realizing it, through open hands, warm meals, and fairness that asked for nothing in return.
A quiet legacy. In the end, what remains is not just history, it is memory. Memory of a time when the simplest acts carried the greatest meaning. A bottle costing 5 cents. A song shared between enemies. A taste of ice cream under the same sun. Those moments built trust in a world where trust had been destroyed. They reminded humankind that no system, no flag, no empire can last without kindness. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson the 20th century left behind: that the sweetest victories are not won on battlefields, but in hearts that choose to remain human.